The sun hung heavy in the Texas sky, and the air tasted thick, almost like it was trying to smother everything it touched. Elsa stood with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the dusty ground beneath her feet, uncertain and still trying to process everything. She had expected the worst: cruelty, starvation, endless days of hopelessness. Instead, she found herself staring at a scene so ordinary, so American, it was almost absurd. A man, a farmer by the looks of him, with a thick Stetson hat perched atop his head, approached the wire fence. In his hands, he carried a tray piled high with what smelled like meat, a scent that was both foreign and intoxicating to her senses. The last time she had smelled anything like this, it had been back in Germany, before the war took everything from her. He stepped closer, not threatening, not angry, just a man, with a plate of food. It was the last thing she expected to see in a place like this. "You girls hungry?" he asked, his voice low and easy, as if he were asking nothing more than how the weather was. Elsa didn't know how to respond. She was still wrestling with the disbelief that someone, anyone, would offer food, let alone food like this. "Steak," he continued, "and some barbecue. No catch. Just eat." It wasn't possible. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had heard the stories. German women, especially those who had been involved in the war, were supposed to be treated as enemies, lesser than human. Not given meals like this. Not offered kindness. Not even a semblance of mercy. Her mind was still trapped in the propaganda she had been raised on. The stories that painted Americans as cruel, relentless, and merciless. But this man, with his soft smile and gentle eyes, was asking if she was hungry. He didn't look like the devil. He looked like a man. Elsa glanced over at the other women beside her, their expressions matching hers: confusion, wariness, skepticism. One of them, a young woman with dark hair named Greta, spoke up. "What is this?" she asked, the words barely audible. The man grinned, setting the tray down on the ground. "Barbecue," he said, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a strange riddle. Elsa stared at the food. The smell was incredible, a mix of something smoky and spicy that seemed to fill the air with warmth. She had never tasted anything like it. The closest she had come to something like this was a roasted piece of meat back home, but that had been months ago, and nothing like this had ever crossed her path. She felt her stomach rumble, but her mind held her back. Was this some kind of trick? Were they going to poison them? She caught the man's eye, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something. A kindness, a familiarity in his gaze. It was so foreign to her, so out of place in this camp, in this life she had been thrust into. "Try it," he said softly, his voice like an invitation, a simple suggestion. Elsa hesitated. She didn't want to be deceived. But then, something inside her, something deep and instinctual, urged her to try. Slowly, she reached for the fork. As the cool metal touched the hot, juicy steak, she could feel the heat rise up her arm. She lifted the first bite to her mouth, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The silence of the moment almost unbearable. And then, she bit down. The flavor exploded in her mouth, rich and savory, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was real. It was food. Not the tasteless, bland rations they had been given at the camp. This was something different. This was something human. Elsa swallowed hard, trying to process the overwhelming taste. She looked at the others, and they too had taken bites. Some were still staring at their food, unsure if they should trust what they were eating. But others were already eating hungrily, almost as if they had forgotten what real food tasted like. Elsa felt tears welling in her eyes. It was all too much. The kindness, the unexpected hospitality, it felt like a dream. She thought of her family back home, of the life she had lost, and wondered if they would ever know peace again. In that moment, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and the scent of smoked meat, Elsa's world began to shift. This was not what she had imagined. It was so much more. And as she sat there, eating the food with trembling hands, she realized something. Kindness could be found in the most unexpected places. The warm Texas sun beat down as Elsa and the other women sat together, their minds still processing what had just happened. The shock of receiving such an unexpected kindness, the meal, the hospitality, still lingered in the air. Elsa had always believed in the stories she was told. The stories that painted the Americans as the enemy, as people to be feared. But this was different. This was nothing like the image she had been taught to expect. She sat quietly, looking down at her plate, her fork half raised, unsure whether to continue eating or wait for something to happen. Nothing happened. The world didn't collapse around her. No one came to take the food away. No one shouted orders to stop. She took another bite, then another. The taste was richer than anything she could have imagined. She thought of her mother, of the meals they used to share before the war. They had been simple meals, but they had been full of love. It felt almost impossible to experience that kind of comfort again. Elsa glanced over at Greta, who was eating just as quickly, her eyes wide in disbelief. There was no pretension in Greta's face, just the raw, almost childlike wonder at having something so unexpected. Elsa watched her friend take a deep breath as if trying to savor the moment. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about the simple joy of being treated as human, of not being viewed as an enemy, of not being seen through the lens of war. She looked back at the man who had offered them this kindness. John Anderson, the farmer who had shown up out of nowhere, offering them food, asking if they were hungry. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like a man who had simply seen a need and tried to fill it. Elsa couldn't understand it. She was still grappling with the truth she was facing, that the person standing in front of her, a stranger from a foreign land, was treating her better than the people she had known all her life. It wasn't just the food. It was the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, as if she mattered, as if her life, in all its broken pieces, had value. It was an unspoken promise that in this place, this foreign land, she would be treated with respect. Elsa set down her fork and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She hadn't realized how hungry she had been until now. Not just for food, but for kindness, for humanity. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, lost in thought. But when she looked up, she saw John watching her. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of understanding, something that said he knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like the world had turned its back on you. "You're not like they said," Elsa said softly, almost to herself. John didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to the edge of the camp, his boots crunching on the dirt. He paused for a moment, then turned back to face the women. "You'll be treated fairly here. You'll work. You'll eat. You'll live," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of something else in it. Perhaps hope, perhaps sadness, but Elsa couldn't quite place it. She looked around at the other women, who were finishing their meal in silence. Some of them were still skeptical, unsure if they could fully trust this man and the world he represented. But Elsa felt something shift inside her. Maybe this wasn't just about survival anymore. Maybe there was more to life than simply enduring. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, there was room for something more: hope, connection, and even a chance at healing. The rest of the day passed in a haze of quiet moments. The women were given work assignments, simple tasks, nothing too taxing, nothing that would wear them down. Elsa and Greta were sent to the farm's barn, where they helped with feeding the animals and cleaning the stalls. It was hard work, but it didn't feel like the kind of grueling labor they had been used to. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. Elsa paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from her brow, and looked out over the fields. It was strange to think that this was her life now. She had spent so long running from the war, from the destruction it had caused, but now, in this unfamiliar place, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a small flicker of peace. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the next day, or the day after that. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't consumed by fear. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe without the weight of war pressing down on her chest. She glanced over at Greta, who was busy feeding a horse. Greta caught her gaze and gave a small smile, one that reached her eyes. Elsa smiled back. Maybe, just maybe, they could start to rebuild. Not just their lives, but themselves. The days passed slowly under the Texas sun, each one feeling more surreal than the last. Elsa had always thought of time in terms of days that bled into weeks, with no end in sight. But here, in this foreign land where she had once expected only cruelty, she found herself beginning to experience something she thought she had lost forever, a sense of normalcy. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep the darkness of the past at bay, if only for a little while. Elsa woke early each morning, before the sun had fully risen, to help with the daily chores around the farm. The routine was grueling, but it gave her a sense of purpose. The work wasn't nearly as hard as the labor she had done back in the camps, and every task seemed easier with the knowledge that no one was threatening her life. She had started to find comfort in the rhythm of it all, the soft hum of the farm, the smell of hay and freshly plowed earth, and the way the animals seemed to trust her. It was a quiet, steady sort of peace that she had never expected to find. The mornings were spent in the barn, mucking out stalls, feeding the animals, and cleaning the equipment. By midday, the heat of the sun was nearly unbearable, and the work slowed to a crawl as everyone sought refuge in the shade. The evenings, however, were when the real magic happened. As the sun began to set and the air cooled, Elsa would sit outside with the other women, sharing stories of their lives before the war, of the families they had left behind, of the things they had once dreamed of. There was something about the way the light shifted in the evenings, the golden glow that washed over everything, that made Elsa feel as if she had stumbled into a dream. It was during one of these evenings, as the fireflies began to flicker in the growing twilight, that Elsa found herself sitting beside John. The other women had gone inside, leaving them alone by the fire. It wasn't the first time they had shared a quiet moment together, but tonight felt different. There was something unspoken in the air between them, something that neither of them was quite ready to address. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the crackle of the fire, before John spoke. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," he said, his voice low and steady. Elsa turned to look at him, curious. "Here? On this farm?" "No," he said with a small chuckle. "I mean here with you. With all of you. I never imagined I'd be living alongside prisoners of war." Elsa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what do you think about it?" "I think," he hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "I think I've learned a lot. About kindness. About who we really are, beneath all the hatred and fear." Elsa was silent for a moment, taking in his words. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the quiet understanding that had slowly begun to build between them over the past weeks. She had never imagined that someone like John, a man who had fought in a war she had been taught to fear, could understand her, could understand them. "You're not like the others," Elsa said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Not like the soldiers I thought you would be." John smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "I suppose I'm not. But I'm not like the others because I know what it feels like to lose everything." Elsa didn't know how to respond. She didn't know what to say to a man who had lost so much, but had still found it in himself to show compassion to those he had once considered enemies. She didn't know how to respond to someone who had made her question everything she had ever believed. For a long time, they sat together in the silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. And for the first time in ages, Elsa didn't feel the crushing burden of war on her shoulders. She didn't feel like an enemy, like an outsider. She felt human again. The next day, as Elsa was working in the field, she couldn't help but think about the conversation she had shared with John the night before. There was something about the way he had looked at her, something about the way he had spoken to her, that made her heart flutter in a way she wasn't sure how to understand. She had never felt this way before, certainly not in the midst of a war, but there was something about his kindness, about his understanding, that made her believe there could be more to life than just surviving. The thought made her uneasy, as if she was betraying everything she had once believed. But as she worked in the fields, her heart racing as she glanced over at him, she realized something. She had been living in fear for so long, locked away in her own hatred and distrust, that she had forgotten what it was like to feel something other than survival, to feel something human. As the weeks passed, Elsa and John's bond deepened. They found themselves sharing more moments together, talking late into the night about their lives, their dreams, their fears. There was no pressure, no expectation, only the quiet understanding that the world they had once known had been shattered, and they were both trying to find a way to rebuild it, piece by piece. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else, something that felt just as important. Elsa couldn't explain it, and she didn't need to. All she knew was that, in this strange, foreign place, she had begun to find a part of herself she had thought lost forever. As the days stretched into weeks, Elsa found herself slowly but surely falling into a routine that had once seemed impossible. The fear that had dominated her every waking moment was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it wasn't as sharp as it used to be. She had learned to focus on the present. The barn, the animals, the work. These simple tasks had become her refuge. The hard physical labor gave her mind a place to rest. It was in the stillness of the farm, in the moments when the sun began to dip behind the horizon, that Elsa allowed herself to imagine a future. The other women, too, had found comfort in the daily chores. Greta had taken to caring for the horses, her gentle touch and calm demeanor earning the respect of the animals. She had even started to laugh again, something that seemed like a distant memory for her. Elsa and Greta had become closer over the weeks, sharing stories of their lives before the war and the families they had left behind. But it was Elsa's moments with John that stood out the most. There was an unspoken bond between them, something that neither of them fully understood but both felt deeply. Every evening, as the sun set and the air cooled, they would find a quiet spot by the barn, away from the others. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sometimes of the present, but more often than not, they simply sat in silence, content in each other's company. One evening, as they sat together, John turned to Elsa with a thoughtful look on his face. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked quietly. Elsa paused, considering the question. It had been so long since she had thought about anything beyond survival. She had stopped thinking about the future the day the war had torn her life apart. But here, in this quiet corner of Texas, she was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of hope. "I didn't used to," she admitted. "But now, sometimes I wonder if there's more to life than just getting through it." John nodded, his gaze distant as he stared out at the land stretching before them. "I used to think the same," he said softly, "that the war would end, and everything would go back to normal. But normal's different now. We're different now." Elsa looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. She had seen it in his eyes, the same realization that had begun to settle in her chest. The war had changed everything, but in some ways, it had also opened up the possibility for something else. For connection, for rebuilding, for a future beyond the rubble. It was a scary thought, but at the same time, it was a liberating one. For the first time in ages, Elsa allowed herself to dream again. She thought about what it would be like to go back to Germany after the war, what it would be like to see her family again, to rebuild what had been lost. But more than that, she thought about the possibility of staying in America, of finding a new life here with John and the others who had shown her nothing but kindness. That night, as Elsa lay in her cot, her thoughts swirled around her like a whirlwind. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something that could be called hope. It was fragile, but it was there, and that was enough. The next morning, as the women went about their chores, Elsa couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She caught John's eye as he worked in the field, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. There was a silent understanding between them, a connection that neither of them had yet fully acknowledged. But it was there, and it was growing stronger each day. As the weeks continued to pass, Elsa found herself looking forward to the quiet moments she shared with John. They didn't need words to communicate anymore. It was in the way they exchanged glances, the way they shared small gestures of kindness, the way they worked side by side without a need for anything more. But there was still a tension between them, an unspoken awareness that lingered in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, John approached Elsa while she was cleaning the barn. He hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice low and unsure. "Elsa, he stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what happens after all this, after the war ends. But I just want you to know, whatever happens, you're not alone." Elsa's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at him. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was the first time he had said anything like that, and it left her speechless. She had no idea what the future held, but in that moment, with the warmth of the Texas evening surrounding them, she knew one thing for certain. She had found something worth holding on to. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to hold on to it together. As the days grew longer and the air grew warmer, Elsa couldn't help but notice the changes within herself. It had been several months since she first arrived on the farm, and with each passing day, her world seemed a little less foreign. The routine had become second nature to her, and the simple acts of tending to the animals, cleaning the barn, and sharing quiet meals with the other women had started to feel like normal life. But it wasn't just the work that had changed her, it was the people. In particular, John. She had always thought of herself as someone who could never trust again, someone who had lost too much to believe in kindness, in anything other than survival. But somehow, over the past few weeks, that had started to shift. Every day, she found herself looking forward to the quiet moments they shared, the small gestures of understanding and care. There was no pressure between them, no expectations. It was just easy. One evening, as the sun began to set and the warm light painted everything in a soft glow, John approached Elsa as she worked near the barn. She was brushing down one of the horses, the rhythmic motion of the brush calming her nerves. John stood by the fence, watching her for a moment before speaking. "You're good with them," he said quietly. Elsa paused, glancing up at him. He wasn't looking at the horse, he was looking at her. "The horses?" she asked, slightly surprised by the compliment. "Yeah," John replied. "You've got a way about you. They trust you." Elsa smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Maybe they trust me because I need them to," she said softly. John didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking at her with a thoughtful expression, as if he were weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke again. "You've changed, Elsa," he said quietly. "I can see it. You're not the same person who first came here." Elsa felt her heart tighten at his words. She wasn't sure if it was because they were true, or because they scared her. She had changed. She knew it. But she wasn't sure if that change was something she could control, or if it was something bigger than her. Something she couldn't undo. "I didn't think I could change," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was just broken. That this was it for me." John took a step closer, his expression softening. "You're not broken, Elsa," he said firmly. "You're surviving. You've always been surviving. But that doesn't mean you have to keep living like that. You deserve more." Elsa looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had always believed she was unworthy of anything more than mere survival, that to want anything beyond that was a luxury she couldn't afford. But as she looked into John's eyes, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could afford it. Maybe she could afford hope. As the days passed, Elsa and John continued to spend time together, each of them finding comfort in the other's presence. They didn't talk about their pasts much. There was no need. The unspoken bond between them was enough. But there were moments, like when they sat together on the porch after dinner, watching the sun dip below the horizon, that felt like something more. Elsa couldn't explain it, but there was a warmth between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. One afternoon, as Elsa worked in the garden, John came by with a small basket of fruit. "For you," he said, offering it with a smile. Elsa took the basket from him, a little surprised. "You didn't have to," she said, glancing down at the apples and peaches inside. "I wanted to," John said simply. "You've earned it." Elsa stared at the fruit for a moment, then looked back up at John. "Thank you," she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. As the weeks continued, Elsa began to realize that the life she had thought she would return to, her old life in Germany, was slipping further and further away. The war had changed everything. But in some strange way, it had also opened up a possibility she hadn't dared to dream of. A future that wasn't defined by loss or pain, but by the possibility of starting over. She didn't know what that future looked like yet, but she knew she wanted to find out. With John by her side, with the other women, with this small piece of land in Texas that had somehow become a home, Elsa was beginning to believe that she could build something new, something different, something worth fighting for. The next few days passed quickly, and Elsa found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of what could be. She began to help John more with the farm, learning how to grow vegetables, how to tend to the land, how to work alongside him. It wasn't easy, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. She was doing something that mattered, something that connected her to the earth and to the people around her. And in that, she found a kind of peace she hadn't known she was capable of. One evening, as they worked together under the fading light of the sun, John turned to Elsa. "You know," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow, "I've never been good at this sort of thing. I've never known how to be." He trailed off, searching for the right words. Elsa looked at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "You're doing just fine," she said. "Better than fine." And in that moment, she realized that the person she had been before the war, the person she had thought she was no longer the person she had to be. She had changed. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like a good thing. The weeks rolled by, And with each passing day, Elsa found herself growing more accustomed to the rhythm of life on the farm. The steady routine had become a comfort, the long hours spent tending to the animals and the land, the quiet moments shared with John, and the growing bond between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. It was a connection that, at times, felt as fragile as the light breeze that rustled the leaves of the trees. But it was there, quietly building itself with every glance, every word, and every shared smile. Elsa no longer felt like a stranger in this land, this unfamiliar place that had, over time, begun to feel like home. The nights, too, had become something she looked forward to. After a long day's work, the evenings were spent in a quiet, peaceful stillness. The sky would change colors as the sun set, casting everything in hues of orange and pink, and the air would cool just enough to make the day's heat bearable. It was during these moments that Elsa felt a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. The quiet of the farm, the sounds of the animals, the soft chatter of the other women. It all made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the war that had defined her existence for so long. One evening, as the last light of day faded from the sky, Elsa and John sat on the porch, their backs against the wooden frame of the house. The warmth from the sun still lingered in the air, and the distant sound of the wind moving through the trees was the only thing that filled the silence. Elsa leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap, and looked up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't respond right away. He sat still, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if weighing the question. Finally, he spoke. "Sometimes," he said softly, "but I don't know if I could go back to the way things were before. The world feels different now." Elsa nodded, her eyes still on the stars above. "I understand," she said. "I don't know if I could ever go back to the way I was, either." It wasn't just the war that had changed her. It was everything. The woman she had been before the war, before the camps, before the pain. It felt like someone else entirely. The war had taken so much from her, but in some strange way, it had also given her something. Something she hadn't realized she needed. It had brought her here, to this small piece of land in Texas, to this farm, to this moment. And in this moment, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The thought hit her like a wave, overwhelming and sudden. She was living. For the first time in years, she wasn't just struggling to get by. She wasn't trapped in the past or burdened by the memories of everything she had lost. She was here, in the present, building something new. She had a future. Maybe it wasn't clear yet, and maybe it wasn't what she had once imagined, but it was hers to create. It was a possibility she had never dared to dream of until now. "I never thought I would be here," Elsa said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "I never thought I'd find a place like this." John turned his head to look at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I never thought I'd be here, either," he said. "But I'm glad I am." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. There was a depth to them, something that neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt. Elsa looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the soldier she had once feared. She saw a man who had, like her, been changed by the war, but who had also managed to hold on to something that made him different, something that made him worth trusting. "Thank you," Elsa said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." John didn't respond at first. Instead, he reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. They sat there for a while longer, watching the stars in silence, their hands still touching. The night had fallen completely now, and the world around them was still, peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Elsa felt at peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. The war had taken so much from her, but in return, it had given her this, a chance at something more than just survival. And that was enough. As the days continued to pass, Elsa found herself more and more immersed in the life she was building on the farm. The work was hard, but it was fulfilling. Every day, she grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. The fear that had once consumed her was slowly starting to fade, replaced by something new. A quiet strength, a quiet hope. And in that hope, she found the courage to dream again. As the months continued to pass, The land around Elsa's small farm seemed to transform along with her. The once barren soil now sprouted with crops, each row of vegetables growing tall and strong under the careful tending of her hands. The animals she tended to had grown accustomed to her presence, and the barn, once cold and empty, now felt like a home. There were still moments when Elsa would pause, the weight of the past tugging at her heart, reminding her of the life she had left behind. But those moments were fewer now, replaced by the growing sense that she was part of something larger, something good. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Every morning, she woke early, greeted by the smell of fresh earth and the sound of birds chirping. The sun would rise over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the fields, and Elsa would step out onto the porch, her hands already calloused from the work, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She had found a sense of peace she never thought she would experience again. It was during one of these quiet mornings, as Elsa was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, that John approached her, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He was holding a letter in his hand, the creases in the paper sharp, as though it had been read and reread 1,000 times. "I got word from the army," he said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something else in it. A weight, a quiet concern. Elsa paused, looking up at him, a feeling of unease settling in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. John handed her the letter, his expression unreadable. Elsa took it, her fingers brushing against his for a brief moment. She unfolded the letter slowly, her heart racing as she read the words. It was a formal notification that the war was officially over. The letter explained the details of the end of hostilities, the return of prisoners, and the process of rebuilding the nations torn apart by the conflict. Elsa's breath caught in her throat. For a long time, she had lived in a world defined by the war, a world where survival had been the only goal. But now, in the aftermath of it all, the world was changing. Elsa's first instinct was to feel relief, to know that the war was over, that there would be no more fighting, no more destruction. But as she read the letter again, a different feeling began to creep in. It was one she hadn't expected. It was the feeling of loss. She had lived in this foreign land for so long, had built something with her own hands, and now it seemed that everything she had worked for might be slipping away. Elsa looked up at John, the weight of the letter heavy in her hands. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. John stood silently for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked as though he was processing the same question, trying to figure out what came next. "It means we have a choice," he said finally. "We can go back to the places we came from, to the lives we left behind. Or we can stay here. We can build something new." Elsa's heart raced. The thought of going back to Germany, to the place that had once been home, seemed both impossible and unimaginable. So much had changed. She had changed. But at the same time, she couldn't help but wonder what would become of her if she stayed here. What would life look like in this strange, beautiful place, surrounded by people she barely knew, with a future that was uncertain? "What do you want to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. John met her gaze with a quiet determination in his eyes. "I want to stay," he said, his voice steady. "I found something here, Elsa. Something I didn't think was possible, and I want to see where it goes." Elsa felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know if she could say the same thing. She didn't know if she could put down roots here, in this land that had once seemed so alien. But she also knew something else, something that had been growing inside her, a feeling she had pushed aside for so long. She had a chance to build a life beyond the war, to create something new and beautiful, to be part of something real. The choice was hers. The future was hers to decide. Elsa looked down at the letter once more, the words blurring in front of her eyes as she took in a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the next step would be, or if she was ready to make it. But in that moment, surrounded by the people she had come to care for, in this land that had started to feel like home, Elsa knew one thing for sure. She was no longer running from the past. She was ready to face whatever came next. "I'll stay," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. John smiled, his face softening with relief. "Then we'll build something together," he said, his voice warm and sure. And in that moment, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Elsa felt something shift inside her, a quiet, steady confidence that, no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it. Together. The weeks that followed Elsa's decision to stay felt like a new chapter in her life, one that was unfolding slowly but steadily, like the first signs of spring pushing through the cold, hard ground. She worked the land with renewed purpose, tending to the crops and caring for the animals with the same quiet determination she had seen in John. The connection between them deepened, but it wasn't just the time spent together that made things feel different. It was the shared understanding that, despite the past, despite everything they had been through, they were building something new. Together. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Elsa and John would sit on the porch, the cool evening air settling around them. The farm, their farm now, was quiet except for the distant sounds of animals, the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. The stillness felt like a promise, one that Elsa had never dared to make to herself, but one she had now started to believe in. There was peace here. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from forgetting the past. It was the kind that came from living through it and choosing to move forward anyway. One evening, as they sat together, John turned to Elsa with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and steady. Elsa turned her head to look at him, curious. "About what?" she asked. "About the future," he said. "I know we've built something here. But what happens after this? After everything settles down?" Elsa felt a pang in her chest. She had asked herself the same question more than once. What came next? She had found a home here, a life she hadn't thought possible. But could she really build a future out of it? Could she truly leave the past behind? "I don't know," Elsa said honestly, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd be here, doing this. But I don't want to go back to what I had before. I found something here, something real." John nodded, his gaze steady as he watched her. "I feel the same way," he said. "But there's still so much uncertainty. We don't know what will happen when the war ends. We don't know how things will change." Elsa's heart sank at the thought of everything unraveling. The end of the war was coming, and with it, the possibility of everything changing again. She had built a life here, and the thought of losing it was terrifying. "What if it all falls apart?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. John reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "We'll face it together," he said simply. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The sincerity in his voice, the quiet strength behind his words, made Elsa feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that no matter what came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The days continued to pass, and with them, the sense of uncertainty that had hung over Elsa seemed to fade. She had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future here. She wasn't running from the past anymore. She wasn't hiding from the memories that had once defined her. She was living in the present, in the quiet moments with John, in the steady rhythm of the farm, and in the knowledge that she had found something that was hers to hold on to. One morning, as Elsa stood in the field, the sun just beginning to rise and paint the sky with shades of pink and orange, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. She had worked hard to get here, to build this life, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The world outside might change, the war might end, but she had something now that was worth holding on to. She had John. She had the farm. And for the first time in years, she had a future. As she looked out over the land, her hands covered in the soil she had nurtured, Elsa realized that this was what she had been waiting for. Not the end of the war, not the promise of going back to the life she had left behind, but this. The life she was building, one day at a time. And as she stood there in the quiet morning light, she knew that no matter what happened next, she was ready to face it. With John by her side, with the land beneath her feet, and with a future full of possibilities, Elsa finally felt like she was home. The end of the war brought with it a sense of uncertainty, but for Elsa, it also brought a strange kind of calm. The world around her was slowly beginning to rebuild, just like the land she had come to love. The farm, once a place of quiet refuge, now felt like a foundation for something bigger, something real. The other women on the farm had started to talk more openly about their own futures, some thinking of returning to their homes, others unsure of where to go next. But Elsa had stopped thinking about the past. The place she had left behind in Germany felt more like a distant memory with each passing day. Her life here, on this piece of land, with John and the other women, was becoming her reality. It was enough. In the evenings, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elsa found herself spending more and more time with John. They didn't need words anymore. There was a comfort in their silence, a shared understanding that had developed over the months. The quiet moments spent together, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, or working side by side in the fields, felt like a promise. Elsa had come to realize that she didn't need grand gestures to feel secure. She didn't need to know exactly what the future held. She just needed to know that she wasn't alone. John had become someone she could rely on, someone who had been by her side through the uncertainties and the fears. And in return, she had done the same for him. The farm was their shared responsibility, their shared future, and together, they had begun to build something worth fighting for. One evening, as they were working together in the garden, John paused and looked at Elsa. There was a look in his eyes, one she hadn't seen before. It was a look of quiet determination, of someone who had made a decision. "Elsa," he said softly, his voice steady. "I've been thinking. We've built something here. But we could build something even bigger. Something lasting." Elsa paused, wiping the sweat from her brow, and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I mean, we could make this farm something more. Not just a place to live, but a place to grow, to help others. We could start something that brings people together, something that helps rebuild what was lost." Elsa's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never considered the possibility of doing more than just surviving, of making a difference. But as she looked at John, she could see the passion in his eyes, the fire that had sparked between them when they first started working side by side. "You're talking about something big," Elsa said, her voice quiet. "Something that could change everything." John nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's a big idea, but I believe we can do it. Together. We've built something here from nothing. We've already started. Why not take it further?" Elsa looked out at the fields, her mind racing as she imagined the possibilities. A farm that wasn't just for them, but for the community. A place where people could come together, work together, and rebuild what had been lost during the war. It was an idea that seemed both overwhelming and exciting, a future that was so different from the one she had imagined just months ago. "It's a big dream," Elsa said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "But I think it's worth dreaming." John smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made Elsa's heart swell with a quiet sense of hope. "Then let's do it," he said simply. Elsa didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but in that moment, as she looked at John, she realized something. She didn't have to face it alone. They didn't have to face it alone. Together, they could build something lasting, something that would not only change their lives but the lives of those around them. The work would be hard, and the road ahead would be uncertain. But Elsa had never felt more sure of anything in her life. She was ready to take on the future, whatever it looked like. The war had taken so much from her, but in its aftermath, she had found something she had never expected, a chance to build, to grow, and to create something meaningful. And as she stood there, in the warmth of the evening light, with John by her side, she knew that together, they could build something worth fighting for. As spring settled deeper into the land, Elsa and John's farm began to flourish in ways they had only dreamed of in the early months. What had started as a simple, quiet existence had grown into something more, a place that now held promise for the future. They had begun to plan, their discussions often stretching late into the evening, when the stars blanketed the sky and the cool night air wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. Together, they had decided to expand. The crops, which had been planted carefully and tended with love, began to yield a bounty that was both surprising and fulfilling. The land, once dry and hard, had transformed into something vibrant and alive. The animals they cared for thrived, and even the barn, which had once felt like a temporary shelter, now stood as a symbol of what they had accomplished together. Elsa felt a deep sense of pride in every inch of the farm. It was not just the land she had helped nurture, it was the life she had built here, a life that had not been handed to her, but earned through hard work and perseverance. She and John were partners in every sense of the word, and each day, as they worked side by side, she felt more and more connected to him. The idea they had discussed, of creating a place where people could come together to heal and to rebuild, was slowly taking shape. It had started as an idea born from uncertainty, from a need for something greater, and now, it was becoming a reality. They had already started to invite people in, offering the land as a place of refuge for those who needed it. They provided food, shelter, and work, allowing others to rebuild their own lives just as they had rebuilt theirs. The farm had become a community, one built on shared labor and mutual respect. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving. Elsa had never expected this kind of life. She had been taught to survive, to endure, and to never hope for anything more. But in this place, with John, with the people they had welcomed into their home, she was learning what it meant to truly live. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after a long day's work, Elsa looked out over the land, watching the last rays of the sun sink beneath the horizon. The air was cool, the stars beginning to shine through the darkening sky. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt as though the world had finally settled into place. "Do you ever think about what we've built here?" she asked, her voice soft. John looked over at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Every day," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I never thought it would be possible. But here we are." Elsa nodded, her gaze never leaving the land in front of her. "I didn't think it was possible either," she admitted. "But somehow it is. We've built something real." John's smile grew, and he reached over, taking her hand in his. "And we'll keep building," he said, his voice steady and sure. Together, Elsa squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a sense of belonging she hadn't known she had been missing. In the past, she had never allowed herself to dream of something like this, of a life that was stable, full of purpose and connection. But now, she couldn't imagine a life without it. She had found a home, not just in the land, but in the people she had come to love and trust. And, most of all, she had found a home with John. Their dreams, once so distant, had become intertwined, and together, they were building something more than just a farm. They were building a future. The days continued to pass, the seasons shifting with a quiet certainty, and as time moved on, Elsa found herself feeling more at peace than she had ever thought possible. There was still work to be done, challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, she was no longer afraid of what the future held. The war had shaped her, yes, but it was no longer her defining story. She was writing her own story now, one of resilience, of hope, and of love. As the farm grew, so did her sense of belonging, and with each passing day, she realized that this was exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by the land she had nurtured, the people she had come to care for, and the man who had become her partner in every way. Elsa had found something she hadn't known she was searching for. She had found home, and as she sat on the porch with John, the stars above them, she felt a quiet contentment settle in her chest. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. Together, they had created something lasting, something that would endure, and it was enough. As the seasons continued to change, Elsa found herself reflecting more on the life she had built on the farm. The crops had flourished, the animals were healthy, and the land, once barren and unforgiving, now stood as a testament to their hard work. It was a life she had never imagined for herself, but it had become hers in ways she couldn't explain. With every passing day, the farm grew, as did the sense of community that had blossomed among them. More people began to come to the farm, seeking refuge and a fresh start. Some were former soldiers, others were families torn apart by the war, all looking for something, anything, that could help them heal. Elsa and John welcomed them all, offering work, food, and shelter in exchange for their labor. Together, they built something that felt more like a home than a farm. The bonds that formed between the people on the farm were unlike anything Elsa had ever known. The work was hard, but it was rewarding. There was a sense of unity, of shared purpose, that made each task feel a little less daunting. And at the end of the day, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, there was a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing they were all working towards something better. Elsa found herself more connected to John than ever before. They had built this life together, brick by brick, and there was something deeply comforting in the way their worlds had intertwined. They had been through so much, and yet, here they were, side by side, creating a future out of the ashes of the past. Their evenings were still their quiet time, when the world around them slowed, and they could simply be. Sitting on the porch, their hands brushing against each other as the cool evening breeze wrapped around them, Elsa felt a peace. she had never known. One evening, as they sat together, John turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said quietly, "this place, this farm, it's more than just land. It's more than just a home. It's a symbol of everything we've been through, everything we've lost, and everything we've gained." Elsa looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and love. She had never thought of it that way before, but now, as she looked around at the farm they had built, she saw it too. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a living testament to resilience, to hope, and to the possibility of starting over, no matter what the world had thrown at them. "I never thought it would be like this," Elsa said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was done. I thought my life was over." John took her hand in his touch warm and steady. "You're not done, Elsa," he said firmly. "None of us are. We're just getting started." The words settled in Elsa's chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, truly understood. John had been there for her, through everything, and she had been there for him. Together, they had weathered the storm, and now, they were ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time, Elsa realized that whatever came next, she wasn't afraid. The farm had given her more than just a roof over her head. It had given her a future, a purpose, and a place to belong. It had given her a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to love again. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Elsa and John continued to work side by side, building a life that was grounded in the values of hard work, kindness, and community. They had created something that was more than just a farm. It was a family. And in that family, Elsa found the strength to face whatever challenges came their way. The future was still uncertain, but Elsa had learned something important along the way. It wasn't about waiting for the world to give her something. It was about creating it herself, piece by piece. And as long as she had John by her side, as long as they had this farm, she knew they could face anything together. The farm had become a place of growth in every sense of the word. What started as a quiet, uncertain refuge had transformed into something strong, alive, and thriving. Elsa watched the land bloom in the spring sun, the crops reaching toward the sky, just as she had. Every day, she worked side by side with John, both of them nurturing the land and the life they had built together. There were still moments when the past crept into her thoughts, moments when she questioned the future. But those moments were fewer now, and each day, the doubt and fear she once carried seemed lighter. As the harvest season approached, the work grew more demanding. The days were long, and the physical labor, though familiar, began to take its toll on Elsa. But it was a good kind of exhaustion, one that came with the knowledge that they were not just surviving, they were thriving. The farm had not only provided for them, it had given them purpose. It had given Elsa the chance to rebuild her life, piece by piece. One afternoon, as they gathered vegetables from the fields, John turned to Elsa with a small, contemplative smile. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Elsa glanced at him, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. "We have," she agreed. "I never imagined this would be our life. But here we are." John paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm glad it's our life," he said quietly. Elsa smiled, her heart warm. "Me too," she whispered. As the season continued, the farm grew busier with each passing week. The crops were bountiful, the animals healthy, and the work more fulfilling than Elsa could have ever imagined. It wasn't easy, but every day was a reminder that they were creating something lasting. They weren't just rebuilding a farm, they were rebuilding their lives. One evening, after a long day's work, Elsa and John sat together on the porch, the golden light of the setting sun bathing the land in a warm glow. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt as if the world had slowed down just for them. Elsa leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly touching the fabric of her worn shirt, the weight of the past still there, but not as heavy as it once was. "Do you think we've found what we were looking for?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of all the questions she had ever asked herself. John was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, with a quiet certainty, he answered, "I think we have. I think we found something real, something we can build on." Elsa's heart swelled at his words. In the quiet moments like this, when there were no expectations and no pressures, she could feel the truth of what they had built together. It was more than a farm. It was a home, a future, She had never imagined that such a future could be hers, but here she was, in this place of peace and possibility. I don't know what the future holds, Elsa said, her voice steady now, but I know that I'm ready to face it. With you. John reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. We'll face it together, he said, his voice low and full of conviction. Elsa smiled, squeezing his hand. Together, she echoed. The days continued to pass, the rhythm of the farm becoming second nature to them. Each season brought its own challenges, but they faced them together, hand in hand. As the harvest season came to an end and the farm settled into the quieter months of winter, Elsa looked out over the land, the frost-covered fields stretching out before her. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. In this place, with John, she had found more than just survival. She had found a life that had been built through hard work, perseverance, and most of all, love. And as she stood there, watching the first snowflakes fall gently from the sky, Elsa knew that whatever the future held, she was ready. Ready to face it, not alone, but with the man she had come to trust, with the community they had created, and with a future that was, at last, within their reach. As winter settled in, the farm became a quiet place of rest, the bustling energy of the harvest season slowly giving way to the stillness of the colder months. The work continued, of course. There was always work to be done on the farm, but the pace had slowed. The air grew crisp, and Elsa, wrapped in her thick woolen sweater, found herself reflecting more than she had in the past. The world seemed so peaceful now. The snowflakes that had begun to fall softly on the ground blanketed everything in a gentle, white silence. It was as if nature itself was taking a breath, letting the earth rest for a while before the cycle began again. Elsa would often walk the fields in the early mornings, her breath visible in the cold air, taking in the stillness of it all. There was something comforting about the quiet, about the way the world seemed to pause, just for a moment. It gave her time to think, to reflect on how far they had come. The farm was thriving, and so was she. She had found something here, something she never thought she would have, a place where she belonged, a place to call home. And in John, she had found more than just a partner. She had found a family. As the days passed, their life together seemed to settle into a rhythm that was both comfortable and fulfilling. The farm was their shared responsibility, and together, they made it work. It wasn't easy, no life built from nothing ever was, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. The bond between Elsa and John had deepened, not just through the work they did, but through the quiet moments they shared. They didn't need to say much. Their presence together was enough. Whether they were working side by side in the barn or sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset together, there was a peaceful understanding between them. And as the new year approached, Elsa began to feel a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement about what the future might hold. The farm was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place to grow, to create, and to look forward to what was next. It was a place where they could continue to build something that would last. One evening, as they sat on the porch, John turned to Elsa with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked quietly. Elsa looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. She had asked herself that question many times. What came next for them? What would the future look like for them, after everything they had been through? "I think about it all the time," Elsa admitted, her voice soft. "But for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next." John smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "I feel the same way," he said. "We've built something good here, Elsa. We've built a life, a future. And no matter what happens, we've got that." Elsa smiled back, her heart full. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. Together, they had created something that was stronger than anything they had ever known before. It wasn't just the farm or the land that they had built. It was the life they had built together. It was the love, the trust, and the shared commitment to something greater than themselves. They had come so far from where they started. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Elsa knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They had found their place in the world, a place they could call home. And in that home, they would continue to grow, to build, and to dream. As the snow continued to fall softly around them, Elsa looked out over the land they had nurtured, her heart at peace. The farm was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place to live. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all.